Okay, welcome back. This is the next application we're going to do in this class. It's going to be another relatively simple application to demonstrate some new controls. Okay. First things first, launch Visual C Sharp. I've got mine launched at the start page. Now remember, when we start a new application, a new homework assignment, new exercise, we're going to do a new project. So I'm going to click this, and we come up to this dialog box here as usual. Make sure that you see that and that selected. Come down to the name, and for the project name we're going to put calculator. Alright, and then once we've got those three things set, we click OK. And after a second we get this pop-up that pops up. Now, alright, that's what my screen looks like right now. I'm going to close this out. Alright, so yours may look different. This is all I need up right now. Alright, the first thing I'm going to do is show you a very useful resource that is not shown by default, and that's grid lines on my form. Right now it's just blank, but grid lines are very helpful in designing. They help you to line up your controls. And so we want to show them. Alright, the way you do that is you go up to Tools, click it, go to Options, and then you have this dialog box that pops up. And I'm just going to collapse that. Alright, so yours probably looks like this. Now, you want to make sure down here, Show All Settings. Check that. Make sure it's checked. And then, well, let me recollapse this. So when Show All Settings is checked, you see everything. Alright, so these are all kinds of features you can manipulate if you want to change your, how the IDE looks and works. On here, I want to click Windows Form Designer. And over here, I've got some layout setting. Well, let's see. Yeah, grid size, layout mode, all these things. What I want, the important thing here is layout mode. And right now it's snap lines. If I click that, left click once, I get a down arrow. And I click that down arrow and I want snap to grid. Alright, so make sure your layout mode is snap to grid. Now, down here it says, for layout mode, toggles the layout mode for the designer. Changes to this property will be seen when the designer is closed and reopened. Okay, so when we click OK, notice I still don't have grid lines. The way I can make them show up is, alright, this is my designer, my design view. If I close it just like it said, okay, now to make it show back up, I want to go to Solution Explorer, which I need to open anyway. And this is my solution calculator. My project is also calculator. And the important file, of course, is my source file, form1.cs. At any time, if I click that, double-click it, it shows my design view, and now you can see I have grid lines. Okay, so these grid lines are great. As big as I make my form, those grid lines will appear. When I run my program, though, they will disappear. They will not be seen in the running program. They're only seen in design view. Okay, to help you line things up. Alright, now, next thing, I need to rename my source file. Okay, so I'm going to right click, go to rename. Okay, remember, don't lose the .cs. I'm going to call this calculator, since it's the calculator program. Do I want to perform a rename of all references? Yes, I do. Okay, and there we go. So now I've got a solution name calculator, project name calculator, and my source file is named calculator, and that's great. Now I'm done with Solution Explorer, so I'm going to close it out. Next thing I want to do is go to Properties. Oh, Properties right there. And of course, I want to, well, first show the properties for my form by left clicking the form, and I want to go up and rename it. Right now it's just called calculator. All I want to do is put capital F R M in front of it. Remember, form is the only one that starts with a capital letter. And I can hit enter, and now you see it changed up here. Okay, what else do we want to do with our form? Remember, font is that's the default right there. I want to change it to, I want to click in there, click this button with the ellipsis on it, and then in my dialog box up here I want to do Tahoma. By the way, if you click up in here and you type a T, you know, for instance, Tahoma starts with T, so if I type T, then the T's will appear. I don't have to scroll through the whole list. But now I see Tahoma, I'm going to double click it, regular, and I want 10. Click OK, and bam, there we go. So Tahoma 9.75. Let's see, text would be the next thing that I want to change. Okay, so I'm gonna again call this calculator. This is what appears, and hit enter. This is what appears in the title bar. You know, keep it simple. Don't make it too complex. Calculator is great. That tells you what it is. Tells the user what it is. Okay, and that's all I need to do to my form. Now, I will tell you, in the book that I'm currently using, if you're looking at that, it's telling you for the size to plug in, let's see, what are they saying? 272 by 192. That's 272 pixels wide by 192 pixels tall. And if I hit enter, that's what it looks like. Now I can tell you from experience that is not enough room. So I'm just going to re-expand this. And if I decide later on that's not big enough, or if I decide it's too big, you know, I can change it at any time, no problem. Okay, that's it for the form. Now we want to go, and my toolbox is not showing, so I'm going to click this button here, and there is my toolbox. Now the first thing that we're going to add, and again I'm following an application in the current book, is a text box. If I look down here, there's my text box. Remember, the current book tells you to double click these. Don't do that. Click and drag, you know, hold down the left mouse button, drag it, drop it about where you want it, and there's my text box, my basic text box. Alright, what a text box is a control for getting input from the user. Now, really, you're going to see later, the user's not really going to put anything in this text box, so really this should have been what's called an output label, which we'll talk about later. But since the book used a text box here, I'm going to keep it a text box. I think basically they just wanted to introduce the text box. First things first, we always rename our form, or excuse me, our control. A text box starts with lowercase t x t, okay? And normally I name a text box after, normally there's a label that goes along with the text box, and I would name the text box after what is in the label. Alright, so not the case here. Here I'm going to name it, I think, display, or I could also call it output, or you know, something that describes its function. So what it's going to do is it's going to display the numbers that we're going to enter on the keypad that we're going to create. Okay, so once you type the name in, click enter, and you can see now it's up here along with my form name. Okay, next thing, let's see, again in the book they tell you to resize it, okay, or they tell you to plug in a size. I'm personally not going to do that. I'm going to just expand it, something like this, and then something like this, and then maybe move it up a little bit so it's like that. Now the design guideline, we'll learn more about design guidelines a little later, is that you should have 2 grid lines between this edge and that control, okay, and 2 between this. Now that's just a guideline again. So again, your guidelines you can change if you want, but that is the standard guideline. So in here you should try to follow the guidelines. Okay, there are cases where you can't, but whenever you can, you should try to. Now make sure your text box is selected. I renamed it already. Okay, the font was inherited from the form. And next thing I want to do is a text box, right? So it's got, well, there's the size. It has text to display. So there's the text property with nothing in it. If I click here, if you look at the what the current book shows, there's a 0 that's displayed by default. So I'm just going to type a 0 in there and hit enter. And now you can see there's a 0 to the far left. Now for a text box, the design guideline for that is that number really should be to the far right. So look at, see, just below text you've got text align, and instead of left I want right. And there you go. There's your basic text box. There's a 0 displayed by default, and that's what we call hard coding. That's what we call hard coding something in, basically, is when we plug it in here, that's what the default is, and it's going to appear there every time we run it. Alright, later on we'll learn how to actually change that on the fly when the program's running by getting input and whatever. Okay, so I think that's all we need to do with the text box. Next step is going to be, we're going to do a panel. Okay. A panel is just basically just a little frame to put around stuff. Panel is, if I can find it, here it is, under containers. They've kind of changed things in this new version, so there's a panel right there under containers. I want to click and drag, drop it about where I want it, and there you go. So it's just going to be a little frame around things. And if I can get it to move, I gotta see that there's how you move this thing. I'm going to move it about to where I want it. Okay, line it up with the edge of this, about 2 grid lines there. I'm going to stretch it downward and then over. What this group is going to do is going to hold my numeric keys on my calculator. Okay. Now, and we can always change that later. Now it's really important that you do the panel first. Okay. Don't put the buttons on and then the panel. You want the panel to contain the buttons. So do the panel first. It's the frame. Okay. There's ways of doing it the other way, but to make your life easier in here, just do what I told you.